"Why is my electric bill higher than a nightclub's?" I muttered, staring at the numbers that didn't make any sense. I lived alone. No kids, no crazy gadgets, just a modest home with solar panels, energy-efficient appliances, and a backup battery system. So why did it look like I was powering a DJ booth in Las Vegas? That was the moment I turned toward the outdoor power line on the side of my house, half hidden behind some bushes. And there it was, a bright orange extension cord slithering out of my outlet like a thief's hand reaching into my pocket. I followed it silently, barefoot on the grass, around the side fence, and froze. There, in her oversized straw hat and floral robe, stood Karen, the HOA president, sipping lemonade with one hand and shamelessly plugging the other end into her industrial fan and portable heater combo on her back patio. She hadn't just stolen electricity. She had declared war. That afternoon set the tone for everything that followed. I had bought this place for peace after retiring early from my civil engineering job. I wanted quiet mornings, fresh air, and some distance from the nonsense of city life. I didn't want drama. I definitely didn't want to deal with a community dictator who thought her neighborhood status gave her a God-given right to mooch power like a parasite with a name tag. Karen had always been an odd presence in the neighborhood, with her clipboard, her obsession with petunias, and a personality that could turn milk sour. She ran the HOA like a petty dictatorship and loved enforcing rules that didn't even exist. She fined people for improper mailbox angles and unseasonal front door wreaths. So I'd always kept my head down, paid my dues, and stayed off her radar. Until now. I decided not to confront her immediately. Instead, I unscrewed the cover of the outlet, checked the wiring, and confirmed what I feared. The breaker was tripping because someone had been maxing it out daily. Curious, I reviewed my power logs from the smart meter app. Sure enough, spikes occurred every day between 1:00 p.m. and 5:00 p.m., peak tanning and gossip time on Karen's deck. So I did what any normal, non-violent man would do when his power was being stolen by an HOA tyrant. I bought a motion-activated trail camera, hid it inside a decorative birdhouse near the outlet, and waited. The footage I collected over the next 3 days was equal parts hilarious and infuriating. Karen would strut over, usually in some kind of athleisure nightmare, plug in the cord like she owned the property, and walk back while texting with her left hand and holding a smoothie in her right. On the third day, she even did it while shouting across the yard to her husband, "Don't worry, honey. We'll have enough juice for the blender this time." Blender? She was blending things using my electricity. I wasn't just annoyed. I was baffled by the audacity. And when I finally approached her about it, the real insanity began. I caught her mid-plug, her hand gripping the cord like she was defusing a bomb. "Karen, did you know that's my personal outlet?" I calmly asked. She didn't even blink. "Oh, this again? Listen, your outlet faces the HOA-maintained side yard, which is technically community property, so the board and I voted to allow utility sharing for outdoor events." I stared at her, stunned. There was a vote. "Well, it was unofficial," she smirked, "but I'm the president, so it stands." I told her firmly to stop using it, or I'd involve the city. She laughed and walked away, muttering, "You should be thanking me for using your dead space." I could have exploded, but I didn't. I was too focused on what she just confirmed. She thought that outlet was fair game, which meant she was about to learn a very messy lesson. You see, there was something Karen didn't know, something not even most electricians would spot unless they read the property schematics closely. That outdoor outlet had been rerouted. The previous owner, who had a background in sustainable systems, had reproposed it years ago when the septic system was upgraded. It was now on the same auxiliary line that powered the septic tank's aeration motor, part of an advanced eco-waste system that I'd kept running through a custom automation program. Most days the line sat dormant, but when too much electricity was drawn from it, the system diverted power and overloaded a backflow failsafe, a failsafe that released pressure directly into the overflow pipe right below Karen's backyard drainage install, which she had approved last year without HOA votes or county permits. It was almost poetic. That night, I rechecked the system. The load stress was showing red zones. That meant Karen's cords weren't just spiking my bills. They were triggering the septic system's pressure valves. One more big pull, and the whole loop would back up. But instead of stopping it, I optimized the safety limit to just high enough that it wouldn't shut down. I added a timer, a digital countdown. Karen had plugged herself into a ticking poop bomb. The next day, Karen announced her annual summer garden gala. She handed out glossy flyers printed on HOA letterhead, promising drinks, music, and dancing light. I spotted the part that read "Powered by our green energy neighbor, Alex." I hadn't agreed to anything, but I said nothing. I waited. I prepped the septic system's monitor. I calibrated the sensors. And I cleaned my porch rocking chair, poured myself a cold drink, and charged my phone to record everything. By 2:00 p.m., the cords were in, the music was blasting, Karen's guests were twirling under fairy lights and fans, and my outlet was glowing like a beacon of generosity. But in my control app, the countdown had started. 1 hour until pressure failure. I could disable it with a tap, but I didn't. Karen had made her choices. All I did was watch the numbers tick down and wait for the moment her smug grin turned into a scream. And when it did, well, let's just say she never looked at a power cord the same way again. The neighborhood was practically humming with excitement. It wasn't every day that Karen threw a bash like this, and true to her excessive nature, she was going all out for the summer garden gala. Guests were trickling in dressed like they were attending a wedding reception, not a backyard gathering. She'd rented sound equipment, hired a local guitarist, and had a margarita machine stationed right next to her outdoor fire pit. I could see everything from my porch as I rocked slowly with a lemonade in hand, my phone balanced on my knee already recording. It felt like watching a heist movie, only the criminal didn't even realize they were about to rob themselves. My smart monitor blinked softly from the side table. The countdown was at 58 minutes. The tension wasn't just in the wires. It was humming through the entire neighborhood. Karen strutted about like a queen, barking orders to her helpers, all of whom were HOA members desperately trying to stay in her good graces. The extension cord from my outlet was taped down across the grass, feeding power into a grotesque tangle of splitters and adapters. It looked like she was trying to light up a stadium, not a backyard. Fans roared at full blast, decorative lanterns buzzed from overloaded LEDs, and the ice machine chugged with effort. A child ran by holding a slushy cup the size of his head, followed by a woman in high heels swatting mosquitoes like she was auditioning for a role in a zombie film. I took another sip of lemonade and smiled. At 38 minutes to go, the septic system's pressure had reached a critical threshold. The fail-safe valve had activated once already, which usually was enough to stabilize things, but the continuous surge from the fans, speakers, and now what sounded like a karaoke machine meant it didn't get a chance to reset. I watched the pressure log hit 93%. Still stable, just barely. Karen took the mic to welcome everyone and bragged about how energy efficient her event was thanks to Alex, who kindly allowed us to use his outdoor outlet. She said with a syrupy grin, her eyes flicking toward my porch. People clapped. I waved with a smirk. If only they knew. 22 minutes. The septic pressure spiked again. This time, the indicator went red for 3 full seconds before stabilizing. Karen's husband flipped on a fog machine. Yes, a fog machine for ambience. I nearly dropped my drink. The fog rolled across the deck while someone cranked up the bass on the Bluetooth speakers. Guests began dancing, spinning, and singing off-key to a garbled version of Sweet Caroline. Across the yard, I noticed one of the elderly neighbors, Mr. Chen, discreetly clutching his stomach and stepping back toward the fence, likely trying to escape the onslaught of noise and bad rhythm. I couldn't blame him. 15 minutes. The septic system issued a soft beep and sent me a warning text. I opened the app and saw it. Secondary containment breach in 13 minutes if input is sustained. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could still stop this, but I didn't move. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about a lesson. Karen had taken advantage of my property, mocked my warnings, and laughed in my face. What was coming wasn't sabotage. It was simply physics and the consequence of unrestrained arrogance. 10 minutes. The aeration pump made a faint hum in the distance, the kind of sound only I could recognize as dangerous. It wasn't designed for sustained overload, and the repeated drains on power had kept it active longer than usual. The fail-safe valve opened halfway and stuck, just like I predicted. Now it was only a matter of time before pressure rerouted to the emergency relief pipe, one that curved through an HOA-maintained drainage channel, and thanks to last year's illegal landscaping project, now ended just under Karen's fancy patio gravel. 7 minutes. The neighborhood kids had started doing cartwheels on the grass. A group of adults circled up near Karen, laughing too loud at her every word. I could barely hear it from where I sat, but the expression on her face made it clear she was deep in one of her classic rants, probably about entitlement or young people not respecting boundaries. The irony was so thick I could cut it with a spoon. 4 minutes. I got up from the porch and walked to my property line just to get a better look. That's when Karen noticed me and shouted, "Careful, Alex. You don't want to step on the shared lawn during a party. You might actually start having fun." More laughter followed. I smiled, nodded, and gave her a mock salute. 2 minutes. She turned around and waved her arms like a conductor. The karaoke machine volume went up again. Someone poured another pitcher of margaritas. The speakers let out a heavy bass drop so intense I felt it in my ribs. I opened the Septic app again. The screen flashed red. 0. There was a moment of silence. Not literal silence, but the kind of pause that slips between beats in a song. The kind where everything seems fine until your brain catches something wrong. Then it hit, a faint gurgling sound, like a blocked drain coughing under pressure. It came from the edge of Karen's party area. Some guests looked down, confused. Murmurs spread. Then the first splash. Brownish-gray water spurted upward from a previously unnoticed metal cap in the ground, right under one of the party tables. It sprayed across the white tablecloth like a champagne bottle popping open. People screamed and backed away, knocking into one another as the gurgling intensified. A second burst followed, stronger, messier. The relief pipe had ruptured from built-up pressure and decades-old fittings. Within seconds, a wave of septic overflow poured out across Karen's prize-winning roses and directly into the path of her decorative koi pond. The water turned muddy. The koi vanished beneath the murk. Then came the smell. It hit like a wall. Guests gagged and ran. Drinks were dropped, purses abandoned. The guitarist jumped off the deck mid-song and vanished down the driveway. Someone yelled, "It's sewage. It's everywhere." I saw Karen standing frozen, still holding the karaoke mic like it could save her. Her face was pure confusion, then horror. Her precious guests were trampling her petunias in a desperate exodus. The fog machine was still running, now mixing with septic mist in a hellish swirl. Karen dropped the mic. It let out an ear-splitting feedback squeal that echoed through the neighborhood. She stumbled backward and slipped in the mud. No, not mud. And landed hard. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I didn't even speak. I just watched as the scene unraveled like the final act of a tragic comedy. The septic system, overloaded by her greed, had turned her backyard gala into a literal disaster zone. And all of it, every second, was caught on camera. The stench lingered well into the evening, even after the guests had fled, even after emergency plumbers arrived and cordoned off the area with yellow caution tape, even after Karen had been hosed off behind her fence by her visibly mortified husband. The smell of sewage and disaster clung to the air like punishment. From my porch, I could hear her yelling at the plumbers, demanding they undo whatever sabotage Alex did, as if she genuinely believed I had crawled through her garden and manually re-engineered the septic system to vomit its contents on cue. The truth was simpler. She'd stolen power, overloaded a system she didn't understand, and ignored every warning sign until the consequences slapped her across the face in front of half the neighborhood. But Karen wasn't the type to take responsibility. No, she was about to double down. By morning, I had an official letter taped to my door, a notice of violation from the HOA, signed by Karen herself, accusing me of creating an unauthorized environmental hazard and threatening me with a $5,000 fine. I read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She was blaming me, Not for the outlet, not for trespassing, not even for the actual overflow. No, she had written that I deliberately configured private utilities in a manner that endangered HOA grounds and residents. It was such a brazen lie that I nearly laughed. But then I realized she was serious. This wasn't just her lashing out. It was a full-blown cover-up attempt, and I was now the scapegoat. The next few days were a bizarre parade of escalating drama. First came the anonymous city complaint. 2 code enforcement officers knocked on my door with printed reports of illegal construction, unsafe chemical storage, and unauthorized modifications to sewage equipment. I walked them through everything calmly and precisely. I showed them my permits, my approved system diagrams, and the county sign-offs from 3 years ago. They nodded, apologized, and left. The very next day, I received a parking citation on my own driveway, claiming my truck was abandoned commercial equipment. It wasn't even 20 feet from my garage. Then came the HOA citations, untrimmed hedges, improper mailbox alignment, and a new one, reflective solar panel glare. Karen had gone full scorched earth mode. I began documenting everything. Every letter, every violation, every interaction. I backed up the camera footage, printed the screenshots of her plugging into my outlet, and pulled the logs showing the power usage timeline. I also printed out a history of all my interactions with the septic system, complete with inspection reports and emails with county officials. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to build a case so airtight that not even Karen could squirm her way out. What she didn't know yet was that my calm demeanor wasn't passivity. It was precision. I'd spent my career designing public infrastructure. I knew how to construct systems meant to withstand pressure, and Karen was about to find out what happened when one of those systems turned its focus onto her. But before I could strike back legally, Karen made another mistake. One night, just past midnight, I heard a faint rattling outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw a figure crouched near my electrical box. I slipped out the back door with my flashlight and phone recording, staying silent until I was close enough to see her, Karen, clumsily yanking at the cover with a screwdriver. She was trying to disconnect the outlet herself. I clicked on the flashlight. She screamed like a raccoon caught in a trash can and stumbled backward. "What the hell are you doing, Karen?" I asked flatly. She held up her hands and stammered something about electrical safety checks. I pointed to the camera above the box and said, "Smile for the HOA newsletter." She turned and bolted back to her yard, tripping over the same orange extension cord she'd left behind. I called the police, not to press charges, but to file a report. When the officers arrived, I handed them the footage and explained the situation. They wrote everything down, spoke to her briefly, and came back shaking their heads. One of them leaned in and muttered, "She's got the kind of confidence only HOA power grants. We see it more than you'd think." Word spread quickly. Neighbors started whispering. Some approached me privately to share their own stories, how Karen had fined them for things that weren't in the bylaws, how she held secret meetings without full board approval, how she used HOA funds to redo the landscaping in front of her house twice in 1 year. She had ruled through intimidation and manipulation for so long that most people had simply given up. But now, thanks to her septic splash spectacular, people were beginning to turn. Still, Karen wasn't done. With the gossip spreading and her authority cracking, she launched a counteroffensive, a PR campaign. Flyers appeared in mailboxes titled, "The Truth About the Septic Scandal." In it, Karen painted herself as a victim of targeted harassment by a troubled and isolated neighbor who had installed dangerous utilities to terrorize the community. She even included blurry photos of my property taken through the fence and referred to my septic control system as a madman's lab. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so vile. But once again, she had underestimated her audience. Someone uploaded the footage from her party to the local neighborhood group online. The video showed the moment the sewage burst, the reactions of the guests, and her standing frozen with a plugged-in cord that traced all the way back to my outlet. It was undeniable. Within hours, the comments section exploded. "She's the one stealing power. How is this Alex's fault? Isn't that, like, illegal?" People who had stayed quiet were suddenly emboldened. One neighbor posted their own footage of Karen plugging in on other occasions. Another revealed a financial discrepancy in the HOA's gardening expenses that benefited Karen's yard exclusively. The tide was turning, and fast. The real turning point came when the city health department showed up. They weren't there for me. They were investigating the contamination of a small runoff creek at the edge of the neighborhood, one that had shown abnormal levels of waste bacteria just days after Karen's gala. Their trace analysis pointed to improper septic runoff. When they questioned me, I handed over every document, every timestamp, and every electrical reading. When they visited Karen, she reportedly slammed the door in their faces. The inspector later told me, "We're escalating this." At this point, 2 HOA board members resigned. Both claimed personal reasons, but one privately emailed me to say they were tired of being part of the circus. Karen, though, continued to strut as if nothing had changed. She still walked her dog past my house twice a day, always pausing to glance at my porch like she expected me to throw a fit or lash out. But I just rocked slowly, nodded once, and let her walk away. Because I wasn't done yet. The pressure hadn't peaked. The blowback hadn't truly begun. Karen had tried to bury me with lies, fines, and bad press, but now the narrative was shifting, and all I had to do was keep the truth visible, let the evidence build, and wait the same way a septic tank waits underground, silent, still, and absolutely certain that, sooner or later, everything will rise to the surface. The calm before the storm arrived in the form of a manila envelope delivered to my doorstep. It wasn't from Karen or the HOA this time. It was from the County Zoning and Environmental Office. Inside was a formal notice of an active investigation into septic backflow and unpermitted landscaping tied directly to the HOA's drainage reroutes, which had contaminated not only Karen's yard, but a small protected wetland zone downstream. Along with it came a request for my cooperation as a qualified system operator. That was the moment the chessboard flipped. Karen thought she was the queen running the show, but she had forgotten that the quiet piece with the plan is always the one that decides the endgame. What Karen never figured out was that I wasn't just some guy who retired early to plant tomatoes and live peacefully. I was a licensed civil engineer with specialization in eco-infrastructure and fluid system diagnostics. For 15 years, I worked with both private contractors and state agencies designing water management systems across the region. My property setup wasn't some amateur DIY mess. It was an optimized, legally approved hybrid system with full data logs and chain of custody traceability. The septic fail-safe wasn't sabotaged. It was a monitored system that responded exactly as it was designed to when someone, Karen, decided to pull triple the power it was rated for without permission. And now the county wanted my help because her recklessness had just turned into a public hazard. I met with the investigators the following day and handed over everything. The footage, the logs, the wiring schematics, even the inspection certificates signed by the original system architect. They barely had questions, just wide eyes and polite nods. What truly raised their eyebrows, though, were the HOA blueprints Karen had filed for her landscaping upgrades last year. According to the county's copy, the backflow trench and gravel pit she'd installed had never been permitted, inspected, or even disclosed. Worse, the route she carved funneled waste runoff straight into a protected buffer zone. That wasn't just a property violation, it was an environmental infraction with potentially massive consequences. While that domino was falling, I filed my own case, civil suit against Karen and the HOA board for harassment, property tampering, and defamation. I compiled a full binder of HOA citations issued under her presidency that directly contradicted the governing bylaws. Several neighbors contributed sworn statements confirming she had imposed fines, revoked privileges, and conducted inspections with no legal authority. One even revealed an email thread where Karen explicitly told board members to let Alexa's outlet teach him a lesson. That line alone might as well have been written in gasoline. All I had to do now was light the match. Karen, of course, had no idea how much trouble she was actually in. From her front lawn, she still acted like royalty. She hosted small wine nights with the few remaining loyalists, loudly bragging about how the HOA had legal grounds to seize my utilities if I didn't comply with community use agreements. I recorded every word. When her followers thinned and stopped showing up, she began walking around with printed statements clutched in her hand, ready to recite them to anyone within earshot. She accused me of setting a trap, claimed I was operating an unlicensed waste facility, and even hinted I had militia teas. That one was particularly rich, considering my biggest crime was growing tomatoes and minding my own business until she started siphoning my electricity like a mosquito with a clipboard. The real fireworks came during the emergency HOA hearing. With 2 board members already resigned and the third avoiding involvement, the county required Karen to hold a public hearing for all HOA residents to discuss the backflow incident and environmental violations. It was scheduled for the community hall on a rainy Thursday evening, and half the neighborhood showed up. I was asked to sit at a separate table with the county representative. Karen strutted to the podium wearing a red blazer like she was hosting a press conference. She launched into a rambling speech about unified communities and power abuses by rogue homeowners before blaming the incident on a faulty system and deliberate configuration by a disruptive neighbor. Then they played the video, my video, the one showing Karen plugging into my outlet 3 days in a row, the one showing her bragging about free power during her party, the one with a timestamp that aligned perfectly with the septic system's fail-safe logs. The room went silent. When the county rep brought up the unauthorized landscaping project and revealed the contamination map of the wetland zone, a collective gasp swept through the crowd. The neighbors weren't just shocked, they were furious. One elderly woman stood up and shouted, "You told us it was a butterfly garden, Karen." Others followed, demanding answers about where their HOA fees were going and why the bylaws were being rewritten without public vote. Karen tried to spin it. She claimed she had verbal permissions, that the county had lost her permit paperwork, and that I had edited the footage. The county rep shut her down cold. Then he issued the final blow. Karen was facing an official environmental fine of up to $250,000. Pending further review, the HOA was being audited, and if they failed the review, Karen could be personally liable for misusing funds and forging documentation. She stood there blinking, mouth opening and closing like a fish. For the first time, she had no words. The meeting ended in chaos. A neighbor filed a motion to vote on her removal. Another demanded a full refund of their last 3 HOA payments. I simply stood, nodded to the rep, and walked out. My job wasn't done yet, but I could feel the air shifting. The silence on Karen's side of the fence became louder with each passing day. 1 week later, the court date for my civil case arrived. Karen showed up with a new lawyer and that same red blazer, now wrinkled and stained. I had my binder, my footage, my permits, and my witnesses. Her defense tried to argue that the outlet was visually accessible, which somehow made it communal. The judge didn't even blink. He reviewed the video, scanned the HOA guidelines, and asked one question. Did you plug in a device on someone else's property without written consent? When Karen stuttered, the case was practically over. I was awarded damages, full attorney fees, and a public letter of apology from the HOA. Karen was barred from using any community leadership position for 5 years. She also faced separate charges from the county for falsifying landscape permits and contributing to environmental degradation. As for the HOA, they were ordered to revise their structure with legal oversight. And who did the court suggest assist with that oversight? Me? So I took the offer, not because I wanted the power, but because if you want something built right, you start from the ground up. Karen had treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. I was going to turn it into a system that actually worked for everyone. And if that meant installing a few safeguards, legal, structural, and maybe even electrical, then so be it. Back at home, I installed a reinforced box around my outlet with a lock and a warning label that read, "Private, do not use." Not that anyone would dare now. Karen hadn't been seen in days. Her house was dark. The lawn was overgrown. A for sale sign would show up soon, I was sure. And when it did, I'd be the first one on my porch, sipping lemonade, smiling like a man who knows the system didn't just flush clean. It flushed with purpose. The quiet that followed Karen's downfall was surreal. After months of nonstop chaos, conflict, and absurd confrontations, The neighborhood felt like a different world. Her once imposing presence had vanished. No morning walks with her dog doubling as inspection rounds. No clipboard slapping against her thigh. No emails dictating shrub heights or trash bin etiquette. Just silence. Her front yard, once meticulously manicured, began to show signs of neglect. Overgrown grass, wilted flowers, a sagging banner that still read, HOA proud. It looked like the throne had been abandoned, and for once, no one missed the queen. Within a week of the court ruling, the HOA board voted to restructure completely. Several neighbors who had once kept their heads down finally stepped up, tired of being treated like tenants in their own homes. They held an open election, and to my genuine surprise, a few of them asked me to join as the infrastructure and compliance advisor. I wasn't interested in power, but the idea of finally restoring some sanity and fairness to this neighborhood had its appeal. So I accepted on one condition. I proposed a new bylaw called the Karen Provision, which clearly outlined limits on HOA authority, mandatory transparency in decisions, and a hard ban on unpermitted access to private property, utilities, or surveillance. It passed unanimously. Nobody even flinched at the name. While the HOA rebuilt itself, Karen's world crumbled behind closed doors. Her legal fees alone were rumored to be in the tens of thousands, not counting the environmental fines still pending. Her husband, who'd been increasingly invisible during the scandal, suddenly packed up a U-Haul and left without a word. A few weeks later, the real estate sign popped up on her lawn, for sale by owner, though everyone knew what it really meant. Karen was fleeing the kingdom she'd ruined, trying to outrun a reputation that now followed her like a shadow. But the story didn't quite end there. About a month after the vote, I was hosting a small backyard barbecue for some of the new board members and a few neighbors who had supported me through it all. It was simple: grilled food, cold drinks, solar lanterns hanging from the trees, and music playing at a respectful, code-compliant volume. Kids ran around with glow sticks, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt like a community instead of a battleground. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, and there she was. Karen stood just beyond the fence, not on my property, but close enough for conversation. She looked thinner, tired, her posture less rigid than before. No clipboard, no sunglasses, just a paper envelope in her hand. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The music continued in the background. Laughter echoed from the patio. Then she spoke. "I came to drop this off. It's the letter the judge made me write. I figured you'd want the original." She held it out. I wiped my hands and took the envelope. "You could have mailed it," I said plainly. She nodded. "I know. I just figured I should hand it to you, face to face." She didn't apologize, not exactly, but her eyes were softer, almost embarrassed. She stood there for a second more, and then turned to leave. "Karen," I called out. She paused. "You ever plug anything into my outlet again, I'm wiring it directly to a skunk sprayer." She cracked a faint, reluctant smile, then walked away without saying a word. That was the last time I saw her. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm. The HOA ran smoothly. Meetings were open and brief. Neighbors started helping each other out again, trimming overgrown bushes, fixing sidewalk cracks, even organizing a seasonal donation drive for local shelters. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, and actually enjoying the property I had fought so hard to protect. It was amazing how much peace could return when one person stopped poisoning the well. I used part of the settlement money to make upgrades, not just to my home, but to the community. I had the septic system fully modernized with enhanced filtration and leak sensors. I installed a new solar grid array with enough storage to stay completely independent year-round. And I added motion sensor floodlights to the outlet area, not because I expected anyone to try again, but because the symbolism felt right. That outlet had been the spark for the entire mess. Now it was sealed, secure, and under permanent watch, like the end of a long chapter finally closed. The biggest surprise came in the form of a letter, not from Karen, but from the county office. They had completed their investigation, and thanks to the detailed logs and assistance I provided, the neighborhood was granted a green infrastructure certification for environmental responsibility. It came with a small grant, which we used to install a native plant garden where Karen's septic splash zone used to be. We built a little bench under a shady tree nearby. I had a plaque installed in the ground that read, "Respect boundaries, electrical, personal, and otherwise." It made people laugh, but it also made them think. Eventually, Karen's house sold. The new owners were a young couple expecting their first child. They were kind, quiet, and to everyone's relief, completely uninterested in HOA drama. On moving day, I walked over to introduce myself. The husband looked at the sealed outlet box and asked, "Hey, what's this for?" I smiled. "Just a reminder of how not to make friends with your neighbors." He laughed, shrugged, and said, "Got it." The night after they moved in, I sat on my porch as usual, drink in hand, watching the stars peek through the trees. It was quiet again, not just in sound, but in spirit. I thought about everything: the petty fines, the smirks, the ridiculous flyers, the septic flood, the courtroom glare. All of it felt distant now, like a bad sitcom you can't believe you watched all the way through, but somehow you're glad you did because the ending made it worth it. I stood up, stretched, and walked back inside, but not before glancing at the outlet one last time. It sat there, locked and labeled, a monument to the absurdity of ego and the power of holding your ground. No one would ever plug into it again, not without remembering what happened the last time someone tried. And I'd never have to flip another switch to prove a point. Some people fight with fists, others with words. Me? I used a septic tank, and in the end, nothing flushed Karen out faster than the truth catching up to her in her own backyard.